He was born Henry McCarty, but history would remember him as Billy the Kid, a name that would become synonymous with the Wild West, a symbol of rebellion and the lawlessness of the frontier. Born on November 23, 1859, in the squalid slums of New York City, Billy's early life was marked by poverty and hardship. The bustling streets of New York were a far cry from the open plains he would later roam. The city was a melting pot of cultures, but also a place where the gap between the rich and the poor was stark and unforgiving. His family, Irish immigrants seeking a better life, found themselves trapped in the Five Points neighborhood, a notorious breeding ground for crime and despair. The Five Points was infamous for its overcrowded tenements, rampant disease, and frequent gang violence. It was a place where hope was often overshadowed by the daily struggle to survive. Little is known for certain about Billy's early childhood. Records are scarce, and the truth is often obscured by myth and speculation. What we do know comes from fragmented accounts and the few surviving documents of the time. These pieces of history paint a picture of a boy who was shaped by the harsh realities of his environment. What is clear is that tragedy struck early. His father died when Billy was just a young boy, leaving his mother, Catherine, to raise him and his younger brother Joseph alone. The loss of his father was a significant blow, thrusting the family into even deeper hardship. Catherine, a resilient woman, did her best to keep her family afloat. Life in the Five Points was brutal. Disease was rampant, violence commonplace. The streets were filled with the sounds of conflict and the cries of the suffering. It was an environment that demanded toughness and cunning, qualities that Billy would come to embody. Catherine struggled to provide for her sons, taking in laundry and whatever odd jobs she could find. She worked tirelessly, her hands raw from scrubbing clothes, her spirit worn from the constant worry about her children's future. Despite her efforts, the family often went to bed hungry, the weight of their circumstances pressing down on them. It was a desperate existence and one that offered little hope for a brighter future. The walls of their tenement seemed to close in on them, the air thick with despair. Yet, amidst the darkness, there was a flicker of resilience, a determination to survive against all odds. Seeking to escape the clutches of poverty and the ghosts of her past, Catherine moved her young family west. The promise of a new beginning, a chance to leave behind the misery of the Five Points, was a beacon of hope. The journey was arduous, filled with uncertainty, but it was a risk worth taking. They bounced around, drifting from city to city, searching for a place to call home. Each new town brought a glimmer of hope, but also new challenges. The transient life was unstable, but it was also a testament to their resilience and determination to find a better life. They eventually landed in Silver City, New Mexico, a rough-and-tumble mining town on the edge of the frontier. Silver City was a place of opportunity, but also of danger. The town was filled with miners, drifters, and outlaws, each seeking their fortune or running from their past. It was a world away from the teeming slums of New York, but it was a world filled with its own set of dangers. The frontier was a place where the law was often a distant concept, and survival depended on one's wits and courage. For Billy, it was a place where he would begin to forge his own path, one that would lead him into the annals of history as one of the most infamous outlaws of the American West. Silver City in the 1870s was a boomtown, teeming with miners, gamblers, and gunslingers, all drawn to the promise of quick riches and easy living. The streets were alive with the clamor of opportunity, where every corner held a new adventure or a potential fortune. The air was thick with the scent of ambition and the dust of dreams being chased. It was a place where fortunes could be made and lost in a single hand of cards, and where life was often cheap. The saloons were filled with the sounds of clinking glasses and the shuffling of cards, as men risked everything they had on the turn of a card. The stakes were high, and the consequences could be deadly. For a young boy like Billy, it was both exhilarating and dangerous. The sights and sounds of Silver City were a constant source of fascination, but they also held a darker side. The allure of quick money and the thrill of the gamble were ever present, tempting even the most innocent of hearts. Catherine McCarty found work in a restaurant, while Billy, still known as Henry, spent his days exploring the dusty streets and saloons of Silver City. He was a curious and adventurous child, always eager to see what lay around the next corner. The town was his playground, and he soaked up every experience it had to offer. He was a bright and quick-witted boy, eager to learn and quick to make friends. His charm and intelligence made him popular among the other children, and he quickly became a well-known figure in the town. He had a knack for making people like him, a skill that would serve him well in the years to come. He learned to ride and shoot, skills that would serve him well in the years to come. The open plains and rugged terrain of the West were his training ground, and he quickly became adept at handling a horse and a gun. These skills would become crucial as he navigated the challenges of his tumultuous life. But Silver City was also a corrupting influence on the young boy. The town's darker elements were never far from the surface, and Billy found himself drawn to the excitement and danger they represented. The line between right and wrong became increasingly blurred as he navigated the treacherous waters of his new environment. He fell in with a rough crowd, petty thieves and gamblers who taught him the ways of the street. These new friends introduced him to a world of crime and deception, where survival often depended on one's wits and willingness to take risks. Billy quickly adapted, learning the tricks of the trade and honing his skills as a street-smart survivor. He began to use the alias Kid Antrim, a name that would later be linked to his growing reputation as a troublemaker. The name gave him a sense of identity and belonging in a world that was often harsh and unforgiving. It was a persona he embraced, one that would come to define him in the years ahead. Tragedy struck again when Catherine, who had been battling tuberculosis, succumbed to the disease. Her death was a devastating blow to Billy, who had already experienced more loss and hardship than most children his age. The loss of his mother left him feeling adrift and alone, with no one to guide or protect him. Billy, just 14 years old, was orphaned and alone once more. The weight of his circumstances pressed heavily upon him, and he struggled to find his place in a world that seemed increasingly hostile and indifferent. The streets of Silver City, once a source of excitement and adventure, now felt cold and unwelcoming. He drifted from town to town, taking odd jobs and getting into scrapes with the law. Each new town brought new challenges and opportunities, but also new dangers. Billy's life became a constant struggle for survival, as he navigated the complexities of a world that offered little in the way of stability or security. Despite the hardships, he remained resilient, determined to carve out a place for himself in the unforgiving landscape of the Wild West. By the time he was 16, Billy had drifted into the orbit of John Tunstall, a wealthy rancher and businessman who saw something of himself in the young drifter. Tunstall offered Billy a job as a ranch hand and a chance to make something of himself. Billy, eager for stability and a father figure, readily accepted. But their newfound peace was shattered by the eruption of the Lincoln County War, a bloody feud between rival factions vying for control of the region's lucrative cattle trade. Tunstall and his allies found themselves on one side of the conflict, pitted against a powerful alliance of ranchers, businessmen, and corrupt lawmen. When Tunstall was murdered by a posse linked to the rival faction, Billy swore revenge. He joined forces with a group of gunmen known as the Regulators, and took up arms against those he held responsible for his benefactor's death. The Lincoln County War was a brutal and bloody affair. Gunfights erupted in the streets of Lincoln and surrounding towns, leaving dozens dead. Billy, despite his youth, proved to be a fearless and deadly fighter. He gained a reputation as a skilled marksman, quick on the draw and deadly accurate with his Colt revolvers. Section 4. The Regulators' allies and enemies in a lawless land. The Regulators, a loosely organized band of ranchers, cowboys, and gunslingers, were united by their opposition to what they saw as a corrupt and tyrannical establishment in Lincoln County. They believed that they were fighting for justice against powerful interests who operated outside the law. Among their ranks were men like Richard Dick Brewer, a seasoned rancher who served as the group's initial leader, and Frank McNabb, a tough-as-nails cowboy with a reputation for fearlessness. These men, along with Billy the Kid and others, took up arms against those they believed were responsible for the murder of John Tunstall. Their campaign of retribution was swift and bloody. They ambushed lawmen, raided ranches, and engaged in shootouts that left bodies scattered across the New Mexico territory. Their exploits made them both heroes and villains, depending on who you asked. But the Regulators were also plagued by internal divisions and shifting allegiances. As the war dragged on, lines became blurred. Former allies became enemies, and the pursuit of justice became entangled with personal vendettas. The Regulators, once united in their cause, began to fracture. Section 5. On the Run, Evading the Law and Seeking a Fresh Start. As the Lincoln County War raged on, Billy the Kid's reputation as a deadly gunslinger grew. His name became synonymous with the chaos and lawlessness of the time, a symbol of the wild and untamed West. He participated in several gunfights, his name whispered in saloons, and feared by those who crossed him. The stories of his exploits spread like wildfire, painting him as both a hero and a villain, depending on who was telling the tale. But the violence took its toll. The constant threat of death and the loss of friends weighed heavily on him, eroding his spirit and leaving him a shadow of the carefree youth he once was. Billy found himself increasingly isolated, hunted by both the law and his enemies. The once bustling towns became ghostly and unwelcoming, each shadow a potential threat, each stranger a possible foe. After the bloody climax of the Lincoln County War, a 3-day battle known as the Battle of Lincoln, Billy and his remaining allies were forced to flee. The battle had left a trail of destruction and death, and the survivors were marked men. They became fugitives, on the run from the law, and a $500 bounty placed on Billy's head. The bounty was a small fortune at the time, ensuring that every bounty hunter and lawman in the territory was on the lookout for him. The once bright promise of a new life had curdled into a desperate struggle for survival. The dreams of freedom and prosperity were replaced by the harsh reality of constant flight and fear. He drifted from town to town, using aliases and relying on the kindness of strangers who were sympathetic to his cause. These brief respites were his only solace, moments of humanity in an otherwise brutal existence. He wrote letters to Governor Lawless seeking a pardon, claiming he was merely defending himself and his friends. In his letters he poured out his heart, hoping to find a sympathetic ear that would understand his plight, but his pleas fell on deaf ears. The governor, embroiled in political turmoil and public pressure, could not afford to show leniency to a man branded as an outlaw. The law was closing in, posses were formed, and the hunt for Billy the Kid intensified, each day bringing him closer to capture or death. Despite the danger, Billy clung to the hope of a peaceful life. He dreamed of a future where he could lay down his guns and live without fear, a simple life far removed from the violence that had defined his past. He dreamed of escaping the cycle of violence that had consumed him. The idea of starting anew, of finding redemption, was a beacon of hope in his darkest moments. He talked of moving to Mexico, of starting a ranch, of leaving his past behind. The vision of a peaceful ranch life with the sun setting over the mountains was a stark contrast to the bloodshed and betrayal he had known. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. The relentless pursuit by the law and the betrayals by those he thought he could trust made it clear that his past would not let him go so easily. The storm clouds of his life loomed large, threatening to engulf any hope he had for a fresh start.